Caleb stared at the breathtaking Apache woman in velvet and silver and saw only a stranger. She stared back and saw the man who had spooned broth into her dying mouth 10 winters ago. Now she needed him to risk everything he had built to save her people from a powerful enemy who would kill them both to keep his secrets buried. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The autumn wind swept across the high desert of Arizona territory, carrying with it the scent of juniper and the distant promise of winter. Caleb Thornton stood at the edge of his ranch, watching the sun sink toward the Superstition Mountains in ribbons of crimson and gold. At 42, he had spent more than half his life building this place from nothing, turning rocky scrubland into one of the most successful cattle operations in the territory. His hands bore the calluses of honest work, his face the weathered lines of a man who had faced drought and flood, rustlers and bandits, loneliness and loss. Yet despite everything he had accomplished, something essential was missing from his life, something he could not quite name but felt in the quiet hours when the work was done and the empty house echoed with his solitary footsteps. The sound of approaching horses drew his attention from the sunset. 3 riders were coming up the main road, their silhouettes dark against the fading light. Caleb's hand moved instinctively toward the pistol at his hip before he recognized the lead rider as Tom Whitmore, his foreman, who had gone into town that morning for supplies. But it was the figure riding beside Tom that made Caleb's breath catch in his throat. She sat her horse with the natural grace of someone born to the saddle, her long black hair cascading over shoulders, draped in a gown of deep burgundy velvet that seemed wildly out of place on the dusty frontier. A choker of bone and silver beads adorned her throat, and even from this distance, Caleb could see that she was one of the most striking women he had ever encountered. Her features spoke of Apache heritage, high cheekbones and copper skin that seemed to glow in the dying light. But there was something else in her bearing, a refinement that suggested she had traveled far beyond the desert canyons, where her people made their home. Tom dismounted first, his expression a mixture of uncertainty and curiosity that Caleb had learned to read over their 15 years of working together. Behind him, the third rider, a young Apache man dressed in a mixture of traditional and American clothing, helped the woman down from her horse with obvious deference. "Boss," Tom said, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. "This here is Miss Ayanna. She says she has business with you, private business, that she would not discuss with me no matter how I pressed her." Caleb approached slowly, his eyes never leaving the woman's face. There was something hauntingly familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of his memory like a half-forgotten dream. She met his gaze without flinching, her dark eyes holding depths that seemed to see straight through him. "Mr. Thornton," she said, and her voice was like music, cultured and refined but carrying beneath it the rhythms of a language far older than English. "I have traveled a great distance to find you. My name is Ayanna, and I believe you once showed kindness to a child who had nothing to offer in return." Caleb frowned, searching his memory for some connection to this elegant stranger. Over the years, he had helped many people, given food to hungry travelers, offered shelter to families fleeing violence or poverty. It was simply what a man did in this harsh country, where survival often depended on the generosity of strangers. "I am sorry, miss," he said slowly, his voice rough from disuse. He spent so much time alone that conversation had become almost foreign to him. "I have met many folks in my time. You will have to be more specific." A ghost of a smile touched her full lips, and she reached up to touch the silver pendant that hung from her necklace, a small crescent moon that caught the last rays of sunlight. 10 winters ago," she said softly, "you found a girl child near death in the canyon 3 miles east of here. She was Apache, separated from her band during an army raid, starving and fever-struck. You could have left her there to die. Many white men would have. Instead, you carried her to your home, fed her, nursed her through the sickness that was consuming her." The memory struck Caleb like a physical blow, so sudden and vivid that he actually took a step backward. The winter of 1873 had been brutal, one of the coldest in living memory. He had been riding the eastern boundary of his property when he found her, a tiny figure huddled in a crevice between two boulders, more dead than alive. She could not have been more than 12 or 13 years old, her clothes torn and inadequate against the bitter cold, her face gaunt with hunger and fever. He had acted without thinking, bundling her onto his horse and racing back to the ranch house. For 3 weeks he had cared for her, feeding her broth when she was too weak to chew solid food, sitting by her bedside through long nights when the fever threatened to claim her. She had barely spoken, and when she did, it was in Apache, a language he did not understand. But her eyes had spoken eloquently of fear and gratitude and something else, something that had touched him deeply even then. And then one morning he had awakened to find her gone. She had slipped away in the night like a ghost, leaving behind only a small feather tied with a strip of leather that he had kept in a box by his bed ever since. Caleb stared at the woman before him, trying to reconcile the skeletal child he remembered with this vision of beauty and elegance. It seemed impossible, and yet looking into her eyes now, he could see the same fierce spirit that had burned in the girl who had survived it against all odds. Little Sparrow, he breathed, using the name he had given her when she was too ill to tell him her real one. The words came out broken, thick with emotion he had not expected to feel. "Is it truly you?" The smile that transformed her face was like the sun breaking through storm clouds, radiant and warm and achingly beautiful. "You remember me," she said, and there was wonder in her voice. "After all these years, you remember. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from today. And if this story moves you, make sure to subscribe because I have something very special coming tomorrow." Caleb could not find words to respond. He stood there like a man struck dumb, his weathered hands hanging uselessly at his sides as he tried to process what was happening. For 10 years he had wondered what had become of the girl he had saved, whether she had found her way back to her people, whether she had survived the harsh world that seemed determined to destroy everything gentle and innocent. And now here she was, standing before him in the fading Arizona light, more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. Tom Whitmore cleared his throat awkwardly, clearly sensing that he was witnessing something private and significant. "I will take the horses to the stable, boss," he said, already gathering the reins. "Give you folks some time to talk." Caleb nodded absently, not taking his eyes from Ayanna's face. The young Apache man who had accompanied her moved to follow Tom, but Ayanna stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. "This is my cousin, Running Deer," she said by way of introduction. "He has served as my protector on this journey. With your permission, he will stay in your bunkhouse while we conduct our business." "Of course," Caleb managed, finally finding his voice. "Any kin of yours is welcome here." He turned to the young man and extended his hand in the American fashion. "You will find food and a bed in the bunkhouse. My men will treat you well." Running Deer studied Caleb with dark, assessing eyes before accepting the handshake. His grip was strong, his expression unreadable. "My cousin speaks highly of you," he said in careful English. "I came to see for myself if her memories were true or merely the fantasies of a grateful child." "And what have you concluded?" Caleb asked, genuinely curious about the young man's assessment. A hint of a smile touched Running Deer's stern features. "I have concluded that my cousin's judgment is sound. You are a man of honor." He released Caleb's hand and turned to follow Tom toward the stables, leaving Caleb alone with the woman who had haunted his memories for a decade. The silence between them stretched long and full, heavy with unspoken words and questions that neither quite knew how to ask. Finally, Caleb gestured toward the ranch house, a large adobe structure with a wide covered porch that he had built with his own hands over the course of many years. "Please," he said, "come inside. You must be tired from your journey, and I imagine you did not travel all this way just to stand in my yard." Ayanna gathered her velvet skirts and walked beside him toward the house, her movements graceful despite the rough terrain. As they climbed the porch steps, Caleb found himself acutely aware of her presence, the subtle scent of sage and wildflowers that clung to her hair, the way the last light of day painted her features in shades of amber and rose. The interior of the ranch house was simple but comfortable, furnished with pieces Caleb had either built himself or acquired over years of careful trading. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth cold now in the mild autumn weather. Bookshelves lined another wall, filled with volumes that had been his only companions through countless lonely nights. Ayana's eyes moved over the space with obvious interest, taking in the details that spoke of the man he had become. "You live alone," she observed. It was not a question. "I do," Caleb confirmed, moving to light the oil lamps that would hold back the gathering darkness. "Never saw much point in marriage. The life I lead is hard, and I would not ask a woman to share it." Ayana settled into one of the leather chairs near the fireplace, arranging her skirts with an elegance that seemed almost unconscious. "And yet you showed great tenderness to a dying child you did not know. A child of a people your government considers enemies." The word struck something deep in Caleb's chest. He had never thought of his actions that winter as particularly remarkable. The girl had needed help, and he had been in a position to provide it. What else could a decent man have done? "Enemies are made by governments in general," he said quietly, taking the chair across from her. "Not by little girls freezing to death in canyons." He paused, studying her face in the lamplight. "But you still have not told me why you have come, or how you found me after all these years." Ayana's expression grew serious, and for the first time, Caleb saw something like vulnerability in her dark eyes. "To explain that, I must tell you what happened after I left your home that night. I must tell you the story of the past 10 years, and it is not a simple tale." "I have nothing but time," Caleb replied, "and I have wondered about you more often than you might imagine." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers absently tracing the pattern on her necklace. When she spoke again, her voice had taken on a distant quality, as if she were looking back across a great expanse of years and miles. "When I left your house that night, I was terrified," she began. "Not of you, but of what would happen if the soldiers found me here. I knew they were searching for survivors of the raid, and I could not bear the thought that my presence might bring danger to the man who had saved my life. So I slipped away before dawn and made my way east, toward the mountains where I hoped to find my people." She paused, and Caleb saw pain flicker across her beautiful features. "It took me 3 months to find them," she continued. 3 months of hiding and starving and running from every sound that might be pursuit. When I finally reached my band, I was barely alive. My grandmother, who was the medicine woman of our people, nursed me back to health for the second time in as many seasons." Caleb leaned forward, drawn into her story despite himself. "And then what happened?" he asked softly. "How did you come to be wearing velvet gowns and speaking English like an Eastern lady?" The smile that touched her lips was tinged with sadness. "That," she said, "is where the story becomes complicated." Ayana rose from her chair and moved to the window, looking out at the darkness that had fully claimed the desert landscape. The lamplight caught the silver in her jewelry, sending small sparks of reflected light dancing across the adobe walls. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of memories both painful and precious. "My grandmother saw something in me," she said. "A gift for languages, for learning, for bridging the gap between worlds. She knew that the old ways were dying, that our people would need those who could walk in both the white world and the Apache world if we were to survive. So when I was 15, she made a decision that changed my life forever." She turned back to face Caleb, and he could see the complexity of emotions playing across her features. "There was a missionary school in Santa Fe," she continued, "run by a woman named Sister Catherine, who was different from most whites we had encountered. She did not seek to destroy our culture, but to help us navigate the new world that was being forced upon us. My grandmother brought me to her and asked her to teach me." Caleb tried to imagine it, a fierce Apache medicine woman entrusting her granddaughter to a Catholic nun. It spoke of desperation, of a pragmatism born from watching everything familiar crumble under the relentless advance of American expansion. "That must have been difficult," he said, "leaving your people, your grandmother." "It was the hardest thing I have ever done," Ayana admitted, "but my grandmother made me understand that it was necessary. She told me that I had been saved for a purpose, that the white man who nursed me back to health had given me a second chance at life, and that I must use it to help my people." She paused, her dark eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart quicken. "She spoke of you often, Caleb Thornton. She believed you were sent by the spirits to preserve something important. Caleb shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He was not a man given to thoughts of destiny or spiritual purpose. He worked his land, raised his cattle, and tried to live honestly. The idea that some greater force had guided his actions that cold winter night felt foreign and unsettling. "I am just a rancher," he said quietly. "I did what any decent man would do." "And that," Ayanna replied, moving back toward him with a grace that seemed almost supernatural in the flickering lamplight, "is precisely what made you remarkable. Decency is not as common as you might think, especially in these times, especially toward my people." She settled back into her chair, and Caleb caught himself admiring the way she moved, the confidence and poise that seemed as natural to her as breathing. This was not the terrified child he remembered. This was a woman who had been forged in the fires of two worlds and emerged stronger for it. "Sister Catherine taught me English, reading, writing, mathematics," she continued her story. "But more than that, she taught me how to move through American society without losing myself. She introduced me to benefactors who supported her mission, wealthy families from the East who were fascinated by the idea of an educated Apache woman." She laughed softly, and there was a note of irony in the sound. "I became something of a curiosity to them," she admitted, "the noble savage who could quote Shakespeare and discuss philosophy. They invited me to their homes, dressed me in their finest clothes, paraded me before their friends as proof that the Indian could be civilized." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, and Caleb felt a surge of anger on her behalf. "That must have been humiliating," he said. "At first, yes," Ayanna agreed. "But Sister Catherine helped me see it differently. She taught me that I could use their fascination to my advantage, that by moving among them, learning their ways, understanding their weaknesses, I could gather knowledge and resources that would help my people. So I played their game, wore their dresses, learned their dances, all while never forgetting who I truly was." She reached up to touch the bone and silver choker at her throat, a gesture that seemed almost unconscious. "This necklace belonged to my grandmother," she said. "I wear it always, beneath whatever costume the occasion requires. It reminds me of who I am and where I come from." Caleb studied her with new appreciation. He had initially assumed that her elegant appearance represented an abandonment of her heritage, an assimilation into the white world that had conquered her people. Now he understood that it was something far more complex, a kind of armor, a disguise that allowed her to move unseen through enemy territory. "You are a warrior," he said, the realization dawning on him, "just fighting a different kind of war." The smile that lit her face was genuine this time, warm with approval. "You understand," she said. "Most do not. They see the velvet dress and assume I have become one of them. They do not realize that every skill I have acquired, every connection I have made, every dollar I have earned has been in service of my people." She leaned forward, and Caleb caught his breath at the passion that blazed in her dark eyes. "For 10 years, I have worked and planned and saved," she said. "I have built relationships with politicians and businessmen, with lawyers and journalists. I have learned how the white world works, where its pressure points are, how to apply leverage in the right places at the right times. And now, I am ready to use everything I have learned." Caleb felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of admiration and something deeper that he was not ready to name. "And that is why you have come to me," he said. It was not a question. Ayanna nodded, her expression growing serious once more. "I need your help, Caleb Thornton," she said. "My people are facing a threat that I cannot defeat alone, no matter how many skills I have acquired. And I believe that you, the man who saved my life 10 winters ago, may be the only one who can help me save them now." The fire crackled in the hearth now, Caleb having lit it more for the comfort of ritual than for warmth. He had made coffee, strong and black the way he liked it, and Ayanna wrapped her hands around the tin cup as though drawing strength from its heat. The intimacy of the moment struck him. This beautiful stranger sitting in his home, preparing to ask something of him that he sensed would change his life forever. "Tell me about this threat," he said, settling back into his chair. "Tell me everything." Ayanna took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice carried the careful precision of someone who had rehearsed these words many times. "There is a man named Harrison Blackwell," she began. "He is a senator from California with ambitions for higher office. He has made his fortune in mining and railroads, and now he seeks to make it in land." Caleb knew the name. Blackwell's reputation had reached even this remote corner of the territory, whispered in saloons and trading posts by men who spoke of his ruthlessness with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. "I have heard of him," Caleb said carefully. "They say he has the ear of the president himself." "They say correctly," Ayanna confirmed. "And that is precisely what makes him so dangerous. You see, Blackwell has set his sights on the land where my people have lived for generations. The canyon country to the north where the rivers run clear and the grazing is rich. Land that was promised to us by treaty, guaranteed for as long as the grass shall grow and the water shall flow." The bitterness in her voice when she recited those familiar words was palpable. Caleb had heard enough broken promises in his time to understand her cynicism. Treaties with Indian nations were worth less than the paper they were written on when powerful men decided they wanted something. "Let me guess," he said quietly. "Blackwell has found a way to invalidate the treaty." Ayanna nodded, her dark eyes flashing with anger. "He has discovered gold in the mountains that border our territory. Not enough to justify a full mining operation, but enough to spark interest, to draw prospectors and speculators. He is using this as leverage to pressure the government into renegotiating the treaty terms." She set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "But that is not the worst of it," she continued. "Blackwell does not merely want the land. He wants my people removed entirely, sent to a reservation in Oklahoma, far from everything we have ever known. He has been spreading stories about Apache raids and atrocities, manufacturing incidents to justify military action." Caleb felt cold anger settle in his stomach. He had seen this pattern before, the systematic destruction of communities through lies and manipulation, the way powerful men used fear and hatred to achieve their ends. "What kind of incidents?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Attacks on settlers," Ayanna replied. "Cattle stolen, homes burned, families murdered. All blamed on my people, though we have done nothing. We have kept the peace as the treaty required, stayed within our boundaries, caused no trouble. But Blackwell has hired men to commit these crimes while disguised as Apache warriors, and the newspapers print his lies without question." She rose abruptly from her chair and began to pace, her velvet skirts sweeping across the wooden floor. "I have documentation," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Testimony from witnesses who saw through the deceptions, letters between Blackwell and his conspirators that prove his involvement, evidence that would destroy him if I could get it before the right people." "Then why have you not done so?" Caleb asked. "With your connections in the East, surely you could find someone to listen." Ayanna stopped pacing and turned to face him. The anguish in her expression made his heart ache. "Because every avenue I pursue leads back to Blackwell," she said. "He has spies everywhere. Twice I've attempted to bring my evidence to sympathetic journalists, and twice those journalists have met with unfortunate accidents before they could publish. A congressman who agreed to investigate was suddenly implicated in a scandal and forced to resign." She moved closer to him, and Caleb could see the desperation beneath her composed exterior. "Blackwell knows about me," she continued, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "He knows I have been gathering evidence against him. 3 weeks ago, men came to the boarding house in Philadelphia where I was staying. If Running Deer had not been keeping watch, I would be dead now." The thought of harm coming to this remarkable woman sent a surge of protective fury through Caleb that surprised him with its intensity. "Why come to me?" he asked. "I am just a rancher. I have no political connections, no influence in Washington." "But you have something more valuable," Ayanna replied. She reached out and touched his arm, the first physical contact between them since her arrival. The warmth of her fingers seemed to burn through his shirt sleeve. "You have land that borders the territory Blackwell covets. You have a reputation among the ranchers and settlers of this region as an honest man, and you have something that no one else I've approached possesses." "What is that?" Caleb asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She looked into his eyes with an intensity that seemed to strip away all his defenses. "You have already saved my life once," she said softly. "You did it without hesitation, without expecting anything in return. My grandmother believed you were sent by the spirits for a purpose. I did not understand what she meant until I learned about Blackwell, until I realized that the only person who might help us without hidden motives was the man who had shown kindness to a dying child 10 winters ago. Caleb was silent for a long moment, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a mantle. He thought of his quiet life, his comfortable solitude, the peace he had built for himself on this remote corner of the frontier. And then he thought of the child he had found in that canyon, the fierce will to survive he had seen in her eyes, the emptiness he had felt when she disappeared. "What exactly do you need me to do?" he asked. Ayana's eyes searched his face as if looking for something she desperately needed to find. The firelight played across her features, highlighting the strength and determination that defined her, but also revealing the exhaustion and fear she had been trying so hard to conceal. "There is a meeting scheduled," she said, her voice taking on a businesslike quality that told Caleb she had thought through her plan carefully. "In 3 weeks, territorial officials will gather in Prescott to discuss the future of Apache lands. Blackwell will be there, along with representatives from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and several influential businessmen who stand to profit from our removal." She moved to the window again, staring out at the darkness, as if she could see through it to the distant mountains where her people waited. "This meeting will determine our fate," she continued. "If Blackwell succeeds in convincing the officials that we are a threat, they will authorize military action. My people will be rounded up and marched to Oklahoma like cattle. Many will die on the journey. Those who survive will be broken." Caleb rose from his chair and moved to stand beside her. He could feel the tension radiating from her body, the weight of responsibility she carried pressing down on her slender shoulders. "And you want me to attend this meeting," he said, "to speak on behalf of your people." Ayana turned to face him, and they were standing closer now than they had been all evening. He could smell the sage in her hair, could see the faint pulse beating in her throat. "I want more than that," she said. "I want you to help me expose Blackwell for what he truly is, to present the evidence I have gathered in a way that cannot be ignored or suppressed. Your voice carries weight in this territory, Caleb. The settlers respect you. The ranchers trust you. If you stand up and tell them the truth about what Blackwell has been doing, they will listen in ways they would never listen to an Apache woman, no matter how educated or refined." The truth of her words stung, but Caleb could not deny them. He lived in a world where the color of a person's skin determined whose testimony was believed, where justice was dispensed according to wealth and connection rather than right and wrong. "There is something else," Ayana added, her voice dropping lower. "Something that I did not wish to reveal until I was certain of your character." She hesitated, and for the first time since her arrival, she seemed uncertain. "The evidence I have gathered is not in my possession. It is too dangerous to carry with me. I have hidden it in a place that only I know, a place in the canyon country that Blackwell seeks to claim." Caleb understood immediately. "You need someone to help you retrieve it," he said. "Someone Blackwell will not be watching." "Yes," Ayana confirmed. "His men have been following me for weeks. If I attempt to return to my homeland alone, they will intercept me before I can reach the hiding place. But if I am traveling with a respected rancher, a white man with legitimate business in the territory, they will be less likely to interfere." The plan was elegant in its simplicity, but Caleb could see the dangers that lurked beneath the surface. Blackwell was not a man who accepted obstacles gracefully. If he discovered what they were attempting, he would not hesitate to remove them permanently. "This could get us both killed," Caleb said flatly. "You understand that?" "I understand," Ayana replied, and there was no fear in her voice, only acceptance. "I have been living with that possibility since I first began gathering evidence against Blackwell, but some things are worth dying for." She paused, her dark eyes holding his with unwavering intensity. "You knew that 10 winters ago when you carried a dying Apache child into your home. You risked everything to save a stranger because it was the right thing to do. I am asking you to do the same thing now, not for one child, but for an entire people." The weight of her words settled over Caleb like a physical burden. He thought of the life he had built, the peace he had earned through decades of hard work and solitude. He thought of the dangers that lay ahead, the powerful enemies they would face, the very real possibility that he would not survive what she was asking of him. And then he thought of the girl he had found in that canyon, barely clinging to life, her eyes filled with a fierce determination to survive against all odds. He thought of the woman she had become, standing before him now in her velvet armor, fighting a war that most people did not even know was being waged. There was never really a choice. "I will help you," he said, and the words felt like a vow, sacred and unbreakable. "I do not know if we can succeed, but I will stand with you against Blackwell and anyone else who threatens your people." The transformation in Ayanna's face was remarkable. The tension that had been holding her rigid seemed to flow out of her body, replaced by a relief so profound that it brought tears to her eyes. She reached out and took his hands in hers, her grip warm and strong. "Thank you," she whispered. "You cannot know what this means to me, to my people." Caleb looked down at their joined hands, her slender fingers intertwined with his calloused ones, and felt something stir in his chest that he had thought long dead. He had spent so many years alone, convinced that love and companionship were not meant for men like him. Now, standing in the lamplight with this extraordinary woman, he felt the first fragile stirrings of hope. "We should begin planning tomorrow," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "You need rest, and we will need clear heads for what lies ahead." Ayanna nodded, but she did not release his hands immediately. Instead, she looked up at him with an expression that held gratitude and something more, something that matched the unfamiliar warmth spreading through his own heart. "My grandmother was right about you," she said softly. "You are a man of honor, Caleb Thornton. Whatever happens in the days to come, I want you to know that finding you again has given me hope when I had nearly lost it." She released his hands and stepped back, the moment of intimacy passing but leaving echoes that lingered in the air between them. Caleb showed her to the guest room he kept for the rare occasions when visitors stayed overnight, and as he watched her close the door behind her, he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. Sleep did not come easily to Caleb that night. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, his mind churning with everything Ayanna had told him and everything that lay ahead. The house felt different now, charged with a presence that had been absent for so long he had forgotten what it felt like to share his space with another person. He could hear the soft sounds of her moving in the guest room, the creak of the bed as she settled in, and these small domestic noises filled him with an unexpected longing. He rose before dawn, as was his habit, and had coffee brewing by the time the first light began to paint the eastern sky. Ayanna emerged from her room dressed in simpler clothes than the velvet gown of the previous evening, a practical riding outfit that still managed to look elegant on her graceful frame. Her hair was braided now, a single thick plait that hung over one shoulder, and without the elaborate jewelry, she looked younger, more vulnerable. "You did not sleep well," she observed, accepting the cup of coffee he offered her. "I heard you moving about in the night." Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with how easily she seemed to read him. "I had much to think about," he admitted. "It is not every day that a man agrees to take on a United States senator." Ayanna smiled, but there was worry in her dark eyes. "If you have changed your mind, I would understand," she said quietly. "I am asking a great deal of you, and I have no right to expect your help simply because of what happened between us 10 years ago." "I have not changed my mind," Caleb replied firmly, "but I would be a fool not to recognize the danger we face. Blackwell is not an enemy to be taken lightly." They spent the morning planning, spreading maps across Caleb's dining table and marking the route they would take into the canyon country. Ayanna's knowledge of the terrain was encyclopedic, and Caleb found himself impressed by her tactical thinking. She had clearly spent years preparing for this moment, studying the land, identifying potential ambush points, planning escape routes if things went wrong. "The evidence is hidden here," she said, pointing to a spot on the map where a narrow canyon opened into a wider valley. "There is a cave system that my grandmother showed me when I was a child. The entrance is concealed behind a waterfall, invisible unless you know exactly where to look." "And you are certain Blackwell's men have not found it?" Caleb asked. Ayanna shook her head. "They do not know it exists. The caves are sacred to my people. We have kept their location secret for generations. Even if Blackwell suspected there was something hidden in that area, he would never find the entrance without a guide. Running Deer entered the house then, having spent the night in the bunkhouse with Caleb's ranch hands. He looked rested but alert, his eyes constantly scanning for threats, even in this seemingly safe environment. "The men are curious about our presence," he reported to Ayanna. "They have been asking questions about who we are and why we have come." "Let them ask," Caleb said before Ayanna could respond. "My men are loyal. They will not betray us to Blackwell or anyone else." Running Deer studied him with that same assessing gaze he had shown the previous evening. "You trust them with your life," he said. It was not a question. "I trust them with my life because they have earned that trust over many years," Caleb replied, "just as you have earned Ayanna's trust by protecting her on her journey here." Something shifted in Running Deer's expression, a softening of the suspicion that had marked his interactions with Caleb thus far. "My cousin has spoken much of you," he said finally. "I was not certain whether to believe her stories. A white man who saves Apache children is not common in our experience." "I am not trying to be a hero," Caleb said honestly. "I am just a man who does what he thinks is right. Sometimes that means helping people who need it, regardless of what color their skin might be." The three of them spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Caleb selected his two best horses for himself and Ayanna, sturdy animals with the endurance needed for rough country travel. He packed supplies carefully, knowing they would be in the wilderness for at least a week and could not count on finding provisions along the way. As the afternoon wore on, Tom Whitmore approached Caleb near the barn, his weathered face creased with concern. "Boss," he said quietly, making sure they were out of earshot of the others, "I do not know what you have gotten yourself into, but I can see it is something serious. Is there anything I should know?" Caleb considered how much to tell his foreman. Tom had been with him for 15 years, had stood beside him through drought and flood, had helped him build this ranch from nothing. If there was anyone he could trust with the truth, it was this man. "There may be trouble coming," Caleb said carefully. "Powerful men who want something that does not belong to them. If anything happens to me, I need you to take care of the ranch. Keep the men working, keep the cattle fed, and do not let anyone take what we have built here." Tom's eyes widened slightly, but he did not press for details. "You have my word," he said simply. "But I would rather you came back to run this place yourself." "That is my intention," Caleb replied. "But a man should always prepare for the worst while hoping for the best." That evening, their last before departing, Caleb and Ayanna sat together on the front porch, watching the sun set over the mountains in a blaze of color that seemed almost impossibly beautiful. The desert had a way of producing such moments, brief glimpses of transcendent beauty that made all the hardship and loneliness worthwhile. "It is strange," Ayanna said softly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "I have traveled so far, seen so many places, met so many people. But sitting here with you, watching this sunset, I feel more at peace than I have in years." Caleb did not know how to respond to that. The feelings stirring in his chest were unfamiliar and frightening, emotions he had deliberately avoided for most of his adult life. But he could not deny that her presence beside him felt right in a way that nothing had felt right in a very long time. "We should get some sleep," he said finally, rising from his chair. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Ayanna rose as well, and for a moment they stood facing each other in the gathering darkness. Then she reached up and touched his cheek gently, her fingers warm against his weathered skin. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." They departed before sunrise, three riders moving through the gray pre-dawn light like ghosts across the desert landscape. Caleb led the way, his knowledge of the terrain around his ranch giving way gradually to Ayanna's guidance as they moved deeper into territory he had rarely explored. Running Deer brought up the rear, his rifle always within easy reach, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon for signs of pursuit. The first 2 days passed without incident. They traveled through scrubland and arroyos, across dry riverbeds and through stands of juniper and piñon pine that provided welcome shade from the relentless sun. At night they made cold camps, eating dried meat and hardtack rather than risking the visibility of a cooking fire. Caleb found himself grateful for his years of solitary living, which had taught him to find comfort in silence and simplicity. But it was the conversations with Ayanna that he treasured most. As they rode side by side through the vast emptiness of the desert, she told him stories of her people, legends passed down through generations about the creation of the world and the spirits that inhabited every rock and tree and stream. Her voice wove magic in the dry air, and Caleb found himself seeing the landscape through new eyes, understanding for the first time that this land he had claimed as his own had been sacred to her people for thousands of years before the first white man ever set foot upon it. "Tell me about your family," Ayanna asked on the third morning as they picked their way through a narrow canyon. "You have never spoken of them." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, unused to sharing the private corners of his history. "There's not much to tell," he said finally. "My parents died when I was young. Fever took my mother and my father followed her 6 months later. I always believed he died of a broken heart more than any physical ailment." "You were alone," Ayanna said softly. "Like me." "I was sent to live with an uncle in Missouri," Caleb continued, the memories surfacing reluctantly from the depths where he had buried them. "He was not a kind man. When I was 16, I ran away and headed west. Been on my own ever since." "And you never married? Never found someone to share your life with?" The question stirred something painful in Caleb's chest. "There was a woman once," he admitted. "A long time ago, before I came to Arizona. Her name was Sarah. We were going to be married, had even picked out the land where we would build our home." "What happened?" Ayanna asked gently. "Cholera," Caleb said, the single word carrying decades of grief. "It swept through the town where we were living, took her in 3 days. I buried her on a hillside overlooking a river, and then I kept moving west until I found a place where the memories could not follow me." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but rather filled with shared understanding. Both of them had known loss, had been shaped by grief and solitude, had learned to survive in a world that offered no guarantees of safety or happiness. "I am sorry," Ayanna said finally, "for your Sarah and for the life you might have had." Caleb shook his head slowly. "I made my peace with it years ago," he said, "or I thought I had. Being with you these past few days has made me realize how much I had closed myself off from the possibility of caring for anyone again." Their eyes met, and something passed between them that needed no words. The attraction that had been building since her arrival was no longer possible to ignore, a connection that went deeper than a physical desire, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. The moment was broken by Running Deer's sharp whistle from behind them. "Riders," he called, pointing toward the eastern ridge. "At least 4, maybe more." Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his rifle as he scanned the horizon. He could see them now, small figures silhouetted against the morning sky, moving parallel to their path. "Blackwell's men?" he asked Ayanna. "Most likely," she replied, her voice calm despite the danger. "They must have picked up our trail somewhere along the way." Running Deer urged his horse forward to join them. "We cannot outrun them in this terrain," he said grimly. "The canyon narrows ahead. If they get above us, we will be trapped." Caleb's mind raced through their options. The canyon walls on either side were too steep to climb quickly, and going back the way they came would only lead them into the arms of their pursuers. There had to be another way. "There is a side canyon half a mile ahead," Ayanna said suddenly. "It looks like a dead end, but there is a hidden passage through the rocks. My grandmother showed it to me when I was young." "Will the horses fit?" Caleb asked. "It will be tight, but yes," Ayanna replied. "If we can reach it before they close the distance, we can disappear." They kicked their horses into a gallop, racing through the narrow canyon with the thunder of hooves echoing off the stone walls. Behind them, Caleb could hear shouts as their pursuers realized what was happening and spurred their own mounts to greater speed. The side canyon appeared suddenly on their left, a dark cleft in the rock that looked barely wide enough for a man to pass through on foot, let alone mounted. Ayanna did not hesitate, guiding her horse into the shadows with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. Caleb followed, ducking low over his horse's neck as the walls closed in around them. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes so narrow that his legs scraped against the rough stone. But Ayanna kept moving forward, her voice calm and steady as she guided them through the maze. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, replaced by confused shouts as Blackwell's men searched for the path their quarry had taken. The hidden passage had worked, at least for now. But Caleb knew they could not count on such luck lasting forever. They emerged from the hidden passage into a valley that took Caleb's breath away. Towering red rock formations rose on all sides, their surfaces carved by wind and water into shapes that seemed almost supernatural. A crystal-clear stream wound through the center of the valley, its banks lined with cottonwood trees, whose leaves shimmered gold and green in the afternoon light. This was the heart of Apache territory, the sacred land that Blackwell sought to steal. "We will rest here tonight," Ayanna said, sliding down from her horse with obvious relief. "The cave where I hid the evidence is another half-day's ride, but the horses need water and we all need sleep." Running Deer immediately set about making camp, his movements efficient and practiced. Caleb led the horses to the stream, watching them drink deeply while he surveyed their surroundings. The valley was well protected, accessible only through the hidden passage they had used, or by climbing down the sheer cliff faces that surrounded it. For now, at least, they were safe. That night, with a small fire burning between them, Ayanna spoke of her grandmother. "She was the wisest woman I have ever known," Ayanna said, her voice soft with memory. "She could heal the sick, predict changes in the weather, and see things that others could not see. When she told me that you were sent by the spirits to preserve something important, I did not understand what she meant." "Do you understand now?" Caleb asked. Ayanna was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I think I am beginning to," she said finally. She looked up at him, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I think she meant that you were sent to preserve hope. Hope for me, when I was a dying child. Hope for my people, now that we face destruction." The weight of her words settled over Caleb like a mantle. He had never thought of himself as a man of destiny, had never believed in spirits or fate or any force greater than the practical realities of survival. But sitting here in this sacred valley, with this extraordinary woman who had traveled across 10 years and hundreds of miles to find him again, he could almost believe that some greater purpose was at work. "Your grandmother sounds like a remarkable woman," he said. "She died 3 years ago," Ayanna replied, and he could hear the grief that still lingered in her voice. "But before she passed, she made me promise to continue the fight, to use everything I had learned to protect our people, no matter the cost." She paused, her fingers moving to touch the bone and silver choker at her throat. "This necklace was her last gift to me. She told me it would protect me, that the spirits of our ancestors lived within it." Running Deer spoke up from the other side of the fire, his voice carrying the same reverence that marked Ayanna's words. "Our grandmother was a medicine woman of great power," he said. "The visions she had were never wrong. If she said this man was sent by the spirits, then it is true." Caleb did not know how to respond to such faith. He was a practical man, a rancher who dealt in the concrete realities of cattle and land and weather. But he could not deny the feeling that had been growing in him since Ayanna's arrival, the sense that his life had been leading to this moment, that everything he had experienced had been preparation for the task that lay ahead. They set out again at first light, moving deeper into the canyon country. The terrain grew rougher as they traveled, the paths narrower and more treacherous. Several times they had to dismount and lead their horses through passages that seemed impassable, trusting Ayanna's knowledge of the land to guide them safely through. By midday, they reached the waterfall. It cascaded down a cliff face perhaps 50 feet high, the spray creating a constant mist that rainbowed in the sunlight. The roar of the water made conversation difficult, but Ayanna gestured for them to follow her along a narrow ledge that ran behind the falling curtain of water. The cave entrance was exactly where she had described, invisible from outside, accessible only to those who knew exactly where to look. They left the horses in a small grotto near the waterfall's base and squeezed through the opening one at a time. Inside, the cave opened into a chamber large enough to stand upright. Ancient paintings decorated the walls, figures of animals and hunters and spirits that had been placed there by hands dead for centuries. Caleb felt a sense of awe wash over him as he realized he was standing in a place that had been sacred to Ayana's people since before recorded history. Ayana moved to a specific spot along the far wall, counting steps and measuring distances with the precision of someone following a carefully memorized map. She knelt and began to dig, her fingers working quickly through the loose soil until they struck something solid. The box she retrieved was made of metal, rusted but still intact. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture, were the documents she had gathered over years of careful work. Letters bearing Blackwell's signature, detailing his plans to manufacture incidents that would justify military action against the Apache. Sworn statements from witnesses who had seen his hired men disguising themselves as warriors. Financial records showing payments to corrupt officials who had looked the other way. "This is everything," Ayana said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Everything we need to destroy him." Caleb took the papers from her hands, scanning them quickly. The evidence was damning, irrefutable. If they could get these documents before the right people, Blackwell's political career would be finished, and so would his plans to steal Apache land. But first they had to survive long enough to present them. A sound from the cave entrance made all three of them freeze. Caleb's hand moved to his pistol as a familiar voice echoed through the chamber, cold and mocking. "I must thank you for leading me here," the voice said. "You have saved me a great deal of trouble." Harrison Blackwell stepped into the cave, flanked by 6 armed men, their rifles trained on Caleb and his companions. Blackwell was exactly as Caleb had imagined him from the stories, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and cold gray eyes that held no warmth, no mercy. He wore expensive clothes that seemed absurdly out of place in the rough cave, and his smile carried the confidence of a man who had never known defeat. "You must be the rancher," Blackwell said, his gaze settling on Caleb with amusement. "Thornton, is it? I must admit I was surprised when my men reported that our little Apache princess had found herself a champion. I would have thought you had more sense than to involve yourself in matters that do not concern you." Caleb kept his hand near his pistol, calculating the odds. 6 armed men against 3, in a confined space with limited cover. The numbers were not in their favor. "Everything that happens in this territory concerns me," Caleb replied, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. "Including the murder and fraud you have been committing to steal land that does not belong to you." Blackwell's smile faltered for just a moment before reasserting itself. "Bold words from a man who is about to die," he said. "But I suppose I should not be surprised. Anyone foolish enough to ally himself with savages clearly lacks the intelligence to recognize when he is outmatched." Running Deer made a sound low in his throat, his hand tightening on his rifle. But Ayana placed a restraining hand on his arm, her eyes never leaving Blackwell's face. "You followed us," she said, her voice carrying the same calm authority Caleb had come to admire. "How?" Blackwell shrugged elegantly. "Your cousin is not as careful as he thinks he is. My men picked up your trail 2 days ago and have been following at a distance ever since. When you disappeared into that hidden passage, I admit I was concerned. But patience is a virtue, and eventually you emerged exactly where I expected you to." He stepped closer, his eyes dropping to the metal box still clutched in Ayana's hands. "And now you have led me to the very evidence you gathered against me. How delightfully convenient. I had wondered where you had hidden those troublesome documents." "You will never get away with this," Ayana said, but Caleb could hear the desperation creeping into her voice. "People know where we are. If we disappear, questions will be asked." Blackwell laughed, a cold sound that echoed off the cave walls. "Questions will be asked and answers will be provided," he replied. "A tragic story of a rancher who fell under the spell of a beautiful Apache woman who was lured into the wilderness and murdered by her savage companions. Running Deer here will be found with your blood on his hands, shot while trying to escape justice." The narrative writes itself. The casual cruelty of his plan made Caleb's blood run cold. This was not a man who would be moved by appeals to decency or justice. This was a predator who saw other human beings as obstacles to be removed or tools to be used. You have it all figured out, Caleb said, buying time while his mind raced through their options. Except for one thing. Blackwell raised an eyebrow. And what might that be? Caleb moved without warning, his hand sweeping across the small fire they had lit in the cave and hurling a shower of burning embers into the faces of the nearest gunmen. In the same motion, he drew his pistol and fired, the shot catching one of Blackwell's men in the shoulder and sending him spinning backward. The cave erupted into chaos. Running Deer tackled the man nearest to him, driving him to the ground and wrestling for control of his rifle. Ayanna dropped behind a boulder, pulling her own small pistol from beneath of her clothes and firing with surprising accuracy. Caleb felt a bullet whistle past his ear as he dove for cover, rolling behind a stalagmite as return fire chipped splinters from the ancient stone. He fired twice more, dropping another of Blackwell's men, then had to duck as a barrage of shots peppered his position. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw Blackwell retreating toward the cave entrance, his face contorted with rage. The senator was not a fighter, Caleb realized. He was a man who paid others to do his dirty work, and now that the situation had turned violent, his instinct was to flee. Ayanna saw it too. She broke from cover, racing toward Blackwell with a speed that caught everyone by surprise. Before the senator could reach the exit, she was on him, driving him backward against the cave wall with a strength born of desperation. "You murdered my people," she screamed, her hands closing around his throat. "You burned our homes, killed our children, and blamed us for your crimes." Blackwell clawed at her arms, his face purpling as he struggled for air. His remaining men were too occupied with Caleb and Running Deer to come to his aid. For a moment, it seemed as though Ayanna would kill him right there, would exact the vengeance that her people so richly deserved. But then her eyes met Caleb's across the chaos of the cave, and something passed between them. A reminder of who she was, of what she was fighting for. She was not a murderer, she was a protector, a bridge between two worlds, and if she killed Blackwell in cold blood, she would become everything he had accused her people of being. She released her grip, letting Blackwell slump to the ground, gasping and coughing. The fight around them was ending, the last of Blackwell's men either dead or subdued. Running Deer stood over two unconscious bodies, breathing hard but uninjured. "It is over," Ayanna said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and emotion. She still held the metal box, the evidence that would destroy Blackwell's empire of lies. "We have won." Caleb moved to her side, his hand finding hers in the dim light of the cave. "Not yet," he said gently. "We still have to get this evidence to Prescott. We still have to make sure the world knows the truth." She looked up at him, and despite everything they had just been through, she smiled. "Then we should not waste any more time," she said. The territorial meeting in Prescott was already underway when Caleb and Ayanna arrived, dusty and exhausted from their journey, but carrying with them the evidence that would change everything. Running Deer had remained behind with the bound and gagged Blackwell, guarding him until the authorities could be sent to take him into custody. The senator's protestations of innocence had grown increasingly desperate as the reality of his situation became clear. The meeting hall was packed with officials, businessmen, and military officers, all gathered to decide the fate of the Apache people. Caleb could feel the hostility in the room as he and Ayanna pushed their way through the crowd, the suspicious glances and muttered comments that followed an Apache woman into a space where she was clearly not welcome. But Caleb had spent a lifetime building a reputation in this territory, and that reputation opened doors that would have remained closed to Ayanna alone. When he demanded to address the assembly, the chairman recognized him, granting him the floor with obvious reluctance. What Caleb said in the next hour would be remembered for generations. He laid out the evidence of Blackwell's crimes piece by piece, reading aloud from letters that proved the senator had orchestrated the very attacks he blamed on the Apache. He presented testimony from witnesses who had seen through the deceptions, financial records that traced the flow of blood money from Blackwell's accounts to the hired killers who had murdered innocent settlers to justify a war. The room grew quieter with each revelation, the mood shifting from skepticism to shock to outrage. When Caleb finished speaking, Ayanna rose to address the assembly, her voice carrying the weight of her people's suffering and the hope for their future. She spoke of the treaties that had been broken, the promises that had been betrayed, the generations of her people who had been pushed from their lands by men who valued gold more than human life. She spoke of her grandmother, the medicine woman who had seen a different future, a world where Apache and American could live together in peace if only they could learn to see each other as human beings. When she finished, there was silence in the hall. Then, slowly, one of the military officers rose to his feet. He was a gray-haired man, with the bearing of someone who had seen too much war, and his voice was heavy with shame when he spoke. "I have spent my career fighting the Apache," he said. "I believed I was protecting innocent settlers from savage attacks. Now I learn that many of those attacks were manufactured by a man who sat in the United States Senate." He paused, his eyes meeting Ayanna's across the room. "I owe you and your people an apology that words cannot express." The vote that followed was unanimous. The treaty guaranteeing Apache lands would be upheld. Harrison Blackwell would be arrested and tried for his crimes, and a new commission would be established to investigate other incidents that had been blamed on native peoples without proper evidence. As they walked out of the meeting hall into the bright Arizona sunshine, Ayanna turned to Caleb with tears streaming down her face. "We did it," she whispered. "After everything, after all these years, we actually did it." Caleb took her hands in his, marveling at the journey that had brought them to this moment. A dying child in a canyon, a chance encounter 10 winters later, a desperate plan that had somehow succeeded against all odds. "What happens now?" he asked, though he already knew what he hoped her answer would be. Ayanna looked up at him, her dark eyes shining with emotion. "Now I return to my people," she said. "There is much work to be done rebuilding what Blackwell destroyed, healing the wounds that his lies inflicted." Caleb felt his heart sink, even though he had expected nothing else. She had a duty to her people, a purpose that had driven her entire adult life. He had no right to ask her to abandon that for a lonely rancher in the high desert, but Ayanna was not finished. "I will need help," she continued, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Building bridges between our peoples will require someone who understands both worlds, someone who has proven he can be trusted, someone who once saved my life and has now helped save my entire nation." The hope that flared in Caleb's chest was almost painful in its intensity. "Are you asking me to come with you?" he managed. "I'm asking you to build a life with me," Ayanna replied. "Not a life of convenience or practicality, but a life of purpose and love. My grandmother said you were sent by the spirits to preserve something important. I believe that something is hope, Caleb. Hope for a future where our peoples can live together in peace." Caleb pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her as though he would never let go. In all his years of solitude, he had never imagined that love would find him again. He had convinced himself that such things were not meant for men like him, that the loss of Sarah had used up whatever capacity for happiness he possessed. But standing here with Ayanna, feeling her heart beat against his chest, he understood that his grandmother had been right. Some things were meant to be, written in the stars and guided by forces beyond human understanding. "I love you," he said, the words feeling strange and wonderful on his tongue. "I think I have loved you since the moment you walked back into my life." "And I love you," Ayanna replied, reaching up to touch his weathered cheek with gentle fingers. "I think a part of me has loved you since I was a starving child, and you carried me to safety." They stood together in the sunshine, two people from different worlds who had found in each other something neither had dared to hope for. Behind them, the meeting hall buzzed with the news of Blackwell's downfall. Ahead of them, a future stretched out like the vast Arizona desert, challenging and beautiful and full of possibilities. The cowboy had not recognized the Apache beauty when she first appeared, but he recognized her now, not just as the girl he had saved 10 winters ago, but as the woman he would spend the rest of his life loving. And somewhere, in a realm beyond human sight, a grandmother's spirit smiled.